All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Attracting, Retaining, and Supporting Professionals of Color in MSP. My name is Rebecca Luber, and I'm the Director of Career and Business Engagement with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. As always, we'd like to thank our alumni and our members of the Alumni Association and our donors for empowering our alumni webinar series. Thank you so much for your support. Here we have some upcoming webinars that you might be interested in. You can see them on your screen. For others, you may go to umnalumni.org/virtual. If you'd like to listen by phone, you can do so by dialing the number on your screen and then entering the webinar ID that you see. All right, next I'm going to kick it over to Emily, and Emily will begin introducing herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rebecca. My name is Emily Fitzsimmons, and I'm the Engagement Manager at Make It MSP, which is a strategic initiative of the Greater MSP Partnership, and we focus on attracting and retaining talent to our region to help fuel our economy. I'm a Minnesota native, but new to the Minneapolis-Saint Paul region. I come with a bachelor's degree in U.S. History and Communications from Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, but I'm a Gopher fan at heart. And in my work as an engagement manager, I really have the opportunity to work with partners like Rebecca and other partners from other colleges and universities, from our corporations, some of the great Fortune 500 companies and mid and small size companies here in the region, as well as community partners and government partners to help drive this work forward of our initiative.
Hi everyone, I'm Frances Huntley. I'm a research analyst at Greater MSP, and I'm also a fellow U of M alumni. I have a bachelor's degree in global studies as well as a master of public policy from Humphrey School. I've been with Greater MSP since 2017, and in my role I help to support the partnership's intelligence function. So we provide knowledge and insights to guide the Minneapolis-Saint Paul region's economic development strategy and work, which is really a variety of direct business attraction, regional marketing, and strategic initiative leadership, as well as a lot of support to our region's cities, counties, and private and institutional partners' work. And again, I just want to take a minute to say thanks so much to Rebecca and the Alumni Association for having us today, as well as last week for our Gen Z webinar. We really appreciate the opportunity to share this work and to continue to partner with the U of M and many of your organizations to work together to keep making our region a place that supports all of us. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off our video here and get started with just our slides. So in our presentation today, we're gonna start by giving just a little bit of background on the work of Greater MSP and Make It MSP and how this specific work came about. And then we'll jump into what we found in our research and how those insights can inform organizational and individual work in our region. And we'll talk about the work that Make It MSP is doing in this space. At the end, we'll answer any questions you might have or open it up for further discussion around any of the topics or insights. So be sure to use the Q&A function anytime throughout our presentation, and we'll get those answered at the end. So the Greater MSP Partnership is a public-private partnership serving the Greater Minneapolis-Saint Paul region. Our mission is to accelerate regional competitiveness and inclusive economic growth through job creation, capital investment, and execution of strategic initiatives. We are a partnership of over 4,500 individuals from over 300 leading businesses, universities, cities, counties, and philanthropic organizations in the region. And we serve as a platform for regional leaders and organizations to come together to do the work they can't do alone. Through these initiatives and through work such as regional strategic planning, goal setting, and business development project support. One of our most valuable projects, specifically in our research and intelligence function, is our regional indicators dashboard, which we've produced each year for the last 5 years. And we're currently working on the 2020 dashboard now. The dashboard is a set of shared metrics that tracks the region's change on critical economic, environmental, and social outcomes. We use it to guide the partnership strategy and work based on where the region's doing well, and we can tell a story to the world, like for instance, our female labor force participation. And then equally where we see that we continue to face challenges as a region. There we lead strategies and initiatives and partner with other organizations such as the Center for Economic Inclusion, for instance, in the work to make our region a more inclusive place for everyone. And like I mentioned before, we have a set of strategic initiatives that we've built and operate within our partnership to drive work in a set of key areas that are critical to our region's growth and success. I'll let Emily talk about what each of these are and introduce the initiative she represents today, which is Make It MSP.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, like Francis mentioned, so Make It MSP was actually the first strategic initiative that we launched as a Greater MSP partnership, and that's focused solely on talent retention and attraction. In alignment with that effort is Connects MSP, which is actually our newest strategic initiative. And this is focused on building inclusive talent pipelines, working with career readiness programs, both driven by communities and by our corporate partners. Some other examples are MBOL. So this is focused on food and egg sector growth. The Regional Air Services Partnership, which if you happen to hop on a plane to Dublin, Seoul, or Mexico City in the last year, those are actually direct examples from that partnership. And then Forge North, which focuses on startups and innovation. And again, today we'll be focusing on some of the data around attracting and retaining professionals of color specifically. So before we really dive into the data that we're here to talk about today, we wanted to quick level set on who Make It MSP is, who takes part in this initiative, and why the work is so focused on data. So when we launched Make It MSP, we really made the effort to make sure that we're not attacking the talent problem with broad strokes. We wanted to have a laser focus and really make the effort to both identify and then focus on the areas where we have either opportunities or threats. The first is MSP Hello. So this is a brand that we created to help us focus work around newcomers in general. So these are anyone that have come to the region within the last 5 years, and we work on inclusively welcoming, helping them build meaningful connections to their new home, and also helping them connect with other newcomers. Second is BMSP, and this is really the team that we're here to talk about today. And this is an effort that's focused on connecting professionals of color, particularly with an effort to increase the retention of professionals of color. On the flip side of that, we have MSP Tech, which is a similar team, except that it's mostly focused on talent. So this are on attraction of talent. So with MSP Tech, we work across our sectors to expand technology talent and to attract tech talent from other tech hubs across the US, like Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, and New York City, for those professionals to come and build their careers here in Minneapolis-Saint Paul. And fourth is our most recently launched team, MSP Campus. So this is the team that works at attracting and retaining recent graduates and students, and in an effort to build pipelines between colleges and employers as a way to bring some of the newest members of our workforce here into our own economy. So that's kind of the how we do things, and here's the what. So what we do as an initiative really falls into 5 buckets. The first and most important is to equip our partners. Much like what we're doing today, we gather data, we gather insights, and we host workshops to continue conversations. We publish those insights through insights reports. And we also lift forums for our partners to connect on some of these findings and explore solutions. We also create resources and tools, some of which we'll introduce later in this presentation. We help to facilitate direct connections through newsletters, hosting events, and even an online platform for one-on-one communication between newcomers and MSP enthusiasts. We help tell the story, not just across a region, but across the country and internationally, about what it's like to build a career and life here in MSP. And one that happens behind the scenes is what we do to build coalitions as well. So this is bringing individuals from organizations across the regions, from professional associations, from various campus and university partners, to try to really build momentum around this work together. So now we can really talk about what the BMSP's intent, what this team's intent is, and help that frame up the data we're about to dive into. So first, it's important to note that there's no silver bullet to DEI strategies, that there never will be, and that this is lifelong work. We fully recognize that. There are, however, many individuals and organizations that are deploying solutions across the region today that continue to render real and positive results. So BMSP, this team, was formed as a platform to bring those individuals and organizations together. And a great example of that is actually the data and insight gathering that we did as a coalition that made this insights report that we'll be talking about today. So with that, we can dive in. But first, there are a few key acknowledgements that we should make. And the first being that there are many dimensions to diversity. For the purpose of this report, we're defining people of color as anyone who identifies as non-Hispanic or white. The American Census has their own aggregated data that we looked into when considering migration. And then through our surveys as well, we also offered opportunities to self-identify. This helps us give a more intimate perspective into the unique experiences of our diverse communities. Second, it's important to note that looking at migration data is one thing, but understanding how that connects to individual experiences is another entirely. And that was truly at the heart of what we sought to examine through this report. And finally, it's important that we acknowledge, both Frances and I, that we're coming to this conversation from our own personal positions of privilege. Our intent is in no way to offer our own interpretation, our organization's interpretation, but rather to really offer the unfiltered, direct insight from these communities and help ensure that their stories, their voices, experiences, and perspectives are shared through the work of BMSP. We as white women of privilege fully recognize the importance that we be stewards of these stories and allies in the collective work to improve the experiences of our region's Black, Indigenous, and people of color together. So with that, let's get started. So first, it's really important that we recognize the real powerhouse and leader behind this work, and that is Professor Janine Sanders-Jones from the University of St. Thomas. So Janine was brought on by our BMSP coalition to really serve as the architect of this survey. She was influential in developing the survey, as well as led the analysis of the insight that we gathered both in 2016 in our initial survey, as well as 2019, and then also taking a look at the changes that occurred between those 3 years. She had a chance to present this data at our workshop, and we're really excited that we're going to this year be packaging video from that workshop to be able to share more broadly, so you can see how we dove deeper into the conversations around these findings led by Professor Janine Sanders-Jones and other leaders from the community. So with that, I'll kick it to Frances to start diving into the data.
Thanks, Emily. As Emily said, the Make It MSP team conducted 2 surveys, one in 2016 and one in 2019. In 2016, partners in the Make It MSP initiative wanted to take a deeper look at how the Minneapolis-Saint Paul region was performing at attracting and retaining professionals of color to the region. That research found that while Minneapolis-Saint Paul was doing well at retaining white professionals, we were performing at a significantly lower level in retaining professionals of color. These findings drove the creation of BMSP, as Emily mentioned. A lot of work and direction came from that first survey of over 1,200 individuals, but in 2019, it was time to take another look to see what had changed. We wanted to see, had we made progress in areas that we expected? Were some of the solutions that we found working? Were we still falling short in some ways? And what did experiences of these professionals look like now in a different cultural and political landscape? The 2019 survey reached about half of the number of respondents as the first survey, but we were still able to glean some really important insights. We also took a deeper dive into the demographic and migration data to help us frame up exactly how our region compared to others in terms of racial and ethnic diversity and what migration patterns looked like when disaggregated by race. So quickly, just looking at the demographic data for the region overall, we have almost 1 million individuals of color in the 16 county metro, which is actually now a 15 county metro, per the American Community Survey. These are all individuals who identify as anything other than white, non-Hispanic. However, we know that some communities of color are quite often underrepresented in this data, but it's the best we have right now to get a rough estimate. So these individuals make up about 27% of our region's population. We've had about 10% growth in the number of these individuals over the past few years. And I recently took a quick look at Minnesota State Demographic Center projections, and they project people of color to make up about 60% of the population in the core metro by 2025. So they're actually just looking at 7 counties rather than 16, but Still, no matter how you look at it, it's pretty safe to say that we're definitely going to see continued and significant increase in our region's racial and ethnic diversity. And then looking at the migration data, we can clearly see that we're still struggling with attracting and retaining professionals of color, specifically in our region. These numbers here are showing net migration. So it's the number of individuals that moved here subtracted by those who left or moved out. Also, these are employed people aged 23 and up with a bachelor's degree or higher. This is sort of our proxy for trying to see what's going on specifically with professionals of color in our region. We look at those with a bachelor's degree or higher. Even though we know this isn't a perfect measurement, we do recognize that having a bachelor's degree as a requirement can be exclusive, and there are certainly many structural barriers to wealth and education that we're aware of. So these net migration numbers actually don't show such stark disparities when you're looking at all people, but the Twin Cities is really losing significantly when you narrow it down to these individuals with a bachelor's degree or higher. When we're looking at, quote, professionals, those with a bachelor's degree or higher, the Twin Cities is losing more people of color than we're attracting. And this isn't true for white non-Hispanic professionals. We're only seeing negative net migration for professionals of color. This data reinforces the need to continue to look at this issue and gather insights about what exactly these individuals are experiencing and why they leave. We know it's extremely important to find solutions to fix this issue. We need our region to be inclusive and to be a place where everyone can thrive. And so Make It MSP took this approach of examining individual experiences to really try to begin to understand how to approach these issues and how to help. And then just quickly jumping forward a bit into some of the related insights about why people of color are coming and leaving from the 2019 survey. We can see that they're coming for reasons like family ties and job opportunities, which I think is pretty typical. They're leaving because they really feel a lack of diversity and cultural awareness here in the Twin Cities. And of course, because of the weather, something we can't exactly do much about, unfortunately. And more than 1/3 of respondents reported that they're likely to leave in the next 3 to 5 years, which really, again, enforces our findings in the data we just discussed that shows that they're leaving at higher rates than non-Hispanic whites, and it reinforces the need to work together as a region to address this issue. And then just to level set and give an overview of our survey sample, in our 2019 survey, the average age was 38. More than half of individuals moved to the Twin Cities from out of state. 88% had a bachelor's degree or higher education, so 42% had a bachelor's degree, and then 46% had a master's or higher. 37% identified as Black or African American, and 25% identified as Asian. Those were the two largest groups represented, but we had several other racial and ethnic groups represented. So now we'll just go through a few of the key findings that helped us understand what was defining individuals of color experiences in our region, and some things to consider in your own companies and organizations. First, we asked in our survey about individual satisfaction with our region's cultural amenities. Almost 2/3 of respondents answered that there simply wasn't enough culturally relevant events, activities, and places. And half of respondents expressed dissatisfaction with the quality of those that are here. This red arrow in the middle of the screen indicates that this number or share went up from 2016 to 2019 in our second survey. In our second survey, more individuals expressed dissatisfaction than the first time. This is a really big deal. We think it could have a lot to do with these individuals leaving our region. We need culturally relevant amenities that reflect not just the dominant culture, but our region's extremely diverse and rich aspirational culture and population. Emily has a couple of great ideas to consider in light of this insight.
Yeah, thanks, Frances. So when asking these questions, and this is true of all of the themes we'll be going through, but in addition to asking people of color to express their experiences with these themes, we also asked them to provide some solutions of what could make them better. And in this question in particular, two really key themes came about. The first is what organizations can do to choose venues, craft events, and connect their employees' activities that are culturally relevant within their organization. This is really important to think about, as all too often we're seeing companies or organizations kind of copy and pasting what has worked for general events and saying it's for professionals of color, but not putting in the work to really make sure that the venues that they're choosing are safe and comfortable spaces for these communities, making sure that the event programming is useful and meaningful for these communities, and also ensuring that the activities are culturally relevant. On the flip side, another key thing that came forward was this real drive to ensure that organizations are supporting such events, venues, and activities outside of their organization. So a key thing that your organization can think of is, what are you doing to sponsor events that are serving these communities? Are you choosing to have your events, whether or not they're aimed specifically at professionals of color, at event venues that provide these spaces for our culturally and culturally relevant activities? These are things that we can do to not only ensure that our actions are creating these spaces, but that we're putting our resources to support those that already are.
All right, next we asked about connection. Half of survey respondents found it difficult to connect with new people in the Twin Cities outside of work and coworkers. This is actually one of our only findings that improved a bit from 2016 to 2019. In 2016, it was 50% of respondents that reported difficulty connecting. And still, this is a pretty significant challenge, and one that we also uncovered in our newcomer survey that we did last year. Newcomers overall to Minneapolis-Saint Paul have repeatedly found difficulty breaking into social circles made up of native Minnesotans. These are longtime friends, longstanding networks that have established cultures. And though we pride ourselves on being Minnesota nice, the feeling is that we're really only nice at a surface level, and it's tough to break through that ice and really belong. Emily, how can organizations and individuals work together to change this experience for folks?
Some of the great responses that came out of this question too, asking professionals and people of color where they are finding those connections, is kind of twofold. The first is that, how are you helping these communities establish roots beyond the first event? So where are the sustained places where they can find community, continue to go back to, and continue to build those relationships that ultimately are a key driver in what makes them stay, both in their place of employment as well as the region. Second is, how can you help create opportunities to engage with one another? So where professionals of color can engage both inside the workplace and outside. So in asking these questions, we asked our survey respondents to provide a few of the places where they were finding these meaningful connections. So what came about were 5 key themes. The first being faith-based organizations and networks. Second, fraternity, sorority, and professional organizations by and for people of color. This in particularly we have found to create a effective bridge between the workplace and the community. Third, meetups and networking events with a diverse range of attendees. Fourth, connections to other parents through children. And 5, activity-based and culturally based community groups. So if you're looking to connect to your own communities of color within your organization, these are great places to keep an eye out for, to see if you can support within the community, and to point to your professionals of color too as an opportunity to make those meaningful connections.
We also asked in our survey specifically about Twin Cities organizations and how many folks saw diversity reflected in their leadership. Only 1/3 of respondents affirmed that their leadership team was diverse. This is a pretty straightforward problem and certainly not a new one, and it was especially surprising and disheartening that this number had decreased from our first survey to our last. Emily, can you talk about some ways that all of us, not just those at the top, can help to solve this issue?
Definitely. So in asking this question specifically about representation and how it can be improved, or where they're seeing gaps in their own organization, the responses that we got from survey respondents were really dynamic in just how they define representation and where representation matters. And the answer is that it matters across the organization and across what you do as a public-facing entity as well. So first, it was really interpersonal. What are you doing to expand the personal and professional networks of your talent of color within your organization? Are you helping them connect to leaders that may look like them? Are you helping them connect to other leaders within the community that can provide them insight of how they navigated this region as a professional of color? These are very important interpersonal ways to increase representation. Second is thinking about representation beyond the executive level, C-suite, or managers within your company, and looking also to board representation. Are you being intentional about eliminating barriers to entry for your board membership? Are you working with organizations like Board Repair that help facilitate greater representation on boards? This is really critical to think about, especially as board membership is such a key form of professional advancement for communities and individuals. And third, are you being intentional about choosing diverse talent as sources for media coverage and stories? And are you allowing those individuals that are stepping forward and sharing their stories to share their authentic experiences as a professional of color, both in your organization and in the region at large?
We also wanted to know about perceptions and experiences for people of color in advancing within organizations in Minneapolis-Saint Paul. Were people being promoted? Did they see other people of color being promoted? What were the feelings and perceptions around career pathways for people of color within organizations in the Twin Cities? Again, less than half of individuals affirmed that they felt there were pathways to promotion in their organizations. And this got significantly worse from our 2016 to our 2019 survey. Emily, can you help us understand how we can work within our organizations to change this narrative?
Yeah, so I think it's important, to note the relationship between this perceived ability to advance as a professional in your organization and the representation at your organization as well. So what is your organization doing to provide a clear pathway to promotion that is inclusive? And not just inclusive, kind of like with the ticket, but what are you actually doing? Are you being actionable about tracking promotions across your organizations? Are you holding your organization accountable if you're not meeting your goals? And are you adjusting appropriately to make sure that your promotion pathways are truly inclusive? If you happen to take part in our Gen Z webinar, you also know that Gen Z specifically, in addition to being the most diverse population of our nation, they also value professional advancement to the point where it's becoming a deciding factor of both where they choose to pursue their first job to if they choose to stay. So again, providing a clear pathway that's inclusive is really important. The second, and this is directly from the insight that we gathered from our survey respondents, is this emphasis on building capacity for employee resource groups, business resource groups, and affinity groups of color. So while we're seeing more and more of these types of groups emerge in organizations, what's being called to attention is that they're not receiving the capacity and the resources they need to really do the important work that they're setting out to do. Are you ensuring that these groups are properly funded? Are you helping manage turnover across those groups to ensure that leadership is consistent? Are you recognizing that the individuals that are putting forth their efforts as members of employee resource groups, that this should not be in addition to their job? This is of value in and of the work that they offer the organization. And in doing so, are you recognizing that leadership that they're offering by taking part in these types of initiatives at your organization?
And finally, we uncovered a strong theme around survey respondents experiencing explicit bias and discrimination. 68% reported experiencing this in our 2019 survey, which was up from 60% in 2016. We asked respondents to describe these experiences, and we heard that individuals were experiencing persistent microaggressions. Some examples included situations where individuals were made to feel as though their cultural differences are other or, quote, exotic, being asked to represent one's culture, which was also referred to as tokenism, and various experiences where individuals were made to feel isolated or unseen, or the opposite, under constant surveillance in public spaces. Emily, what are some solutions around this that the Make It MSP team has discussed?
Yeah, and when we asked this question to the survey respondents to provide examples of their experiences of bias and discrimination, it really came in two forms. First, the individual. So this is the interpersonal one-to-one conversations where they're being victims of bias and discrimination, and oftentimes from their peers. Second is that they're also experiencing it in a systemic way within the structure of their organization. This is through things like hiring practices, promotions, performance reviews. These are all different ways that are structurally built into organizations that are still lacking the cultural competency that is needed for modern day workplaces. So it's really important that as organizations, we're thinking about how we're developing and practicing both individual and cultural competency. Are you providing training for your managers on DEI, no matter where they are in their journey for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Are you also consulting, different experts in the DEI space to ensure that your programs, systems, and procedures at your organizations are really reflecting the cultural competency and inclusive behavior of a modern day organization? Second, are you making sure that there are clear and consistent implications for treating someone unfairly based on race or ethnicity? All too common in our survey, we had experiences of people of color coming forward, reporting these instances of bias and discrimination, and then not seeing any consequences for the perpetrator. Likewise, this is mirrored in the failure to address microaggressions. So as Francis mentioned, a strong echo across both the workplace and the community was that experiences of persistent microaggressions experienced over time have an exhausting impact of people of color. However, oftentimes when people of color are called out, or they call out these microaggressions, they're often met with dismissals like, it's not that big of a deal, or that was not intent of the speaker. And this practice inevitably leads to more silence from people of color and less progress for your own organization in your effort to be more inclusive and empowering of your communities of color. So that sums up the 5 key themes that we found through this, comparing the 2016 research with 2019, but some other key themes emerged as well that are definitely worth sharing and considering as we think about solutions. So the first has to do with the question around asking people of color whether or not they believe their workplace invests in diversity and inclusion support. So in 2016, we asked this question, and the response was that 70% said, yes, we do believe that our workplace is investing in diversity and inclusion efforts. Well, in 2019, we asked the same question, and that dropped to 62%. So this is of note because in the last 3 years, we've definitely seen an increase in the sheer number of diversity and inclusion programs, but we're seeing perceptions of their success decreasing. So this is a really good gut check that we need to be super intentional about the way that we're going about structuring these programs. And in doing so, we actually asked survey respondents to provide some suggestions of how those programs could be more successful. And here's 3. The first is to set measurable goals and enforce for accountability. Second, offer practical tips and tools across your organizations and build in expectations that they be used. Third, provide transparency on how those goals are developed and supported. I think a great quote that we actually got from the survey is, quote, even if we don't always achieve them, publicly measuring them will change behavior, unquote. And that's a direct quote from a 2019 survey respondent. A second question that we asked that was unique to the 2019 survey was around bringing one's full self to work. So we sought out to see if people of color and professionals of color are feeling like they can bring their full self to work. And what we found was that actually the majority do not. We also asked what that looks like. What does it look like to bring your whole self to work in your perspective? And this is a really potent example that we got from one of the respondents. Quote, bringing my whole self means knowing that there's power in what I uniquely have to offer. And I do not have to change my speech, my dress, customs, etc. in order to be effective at my job. According to those same survey respondents, some solutions that could actually help empower employees to bring their full selves to work include 1, empowering them to wear clothing and hairstyles as they please without having to conform to the white lens of professionalism. 2, to talk freely about their experiences of people of color inside and outside of the workplace. And 3, to speak and present authentically without fear of consequence or for challenging the status quo. So that concludes our summary of the research that we found in 2016 and 2019. And today, the BMSP team believes that the best role that we can play in this effort is to provide a safe space to test ideas, to share learnings, and to sustain a collective effort across the many organizations already doing the important work of DEI in our communities and workplaces. Elevate the work and continue to challenge assumptions. That's really the goal of this team. So in doing so, I'm going to introduce 3 projects that we've done to try to test some of these ideas and see if we can create resources to help address the themes that we've come across. The first example is the BMSP Workplace Inclusion Toolkit. So this is a really great example of how we worked with different DEI leaders across the region to create this online training course for employers and teams to use to spark ideas, start the tough conversations around DEI, and to offer some tools about how you can build inclusive practices within your organization. We launched this in 2016, and then over the course of the last 3 years have been gathering feedback, and then relaunched in 2019 with more engaging content, some facilitation resources, as well as other improvements to the kit as well. So this is something that you can bring into your own team to try to build a more inclusive workplace. The second was around testing, ways to bring professionals of colors together in the region. And something that we've been doing in partnership with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber and the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce is around our MSP Mingle networking events and our BMSP newsletter. So the MSP Mingle events in 2019 were held quarterly. Obviously, we're not able to meet in person in 2020 amid COVID-19. But these events were really focused on providing a space for professionals of color to connect to one another. The BMSP newsletter goes out monthly, actually went out yesterday, and this is really a platform to help elevate both the events and opportunities that we're coming up with through the BMSP partnership, but also lift those from other partners like the Center for Economic Inclusion, the Workplace the Forum on Workplace Inclusion, and other affinity networks and the work that they're doing for their communities. And third, through this resource, we try to kind of touch on the experiences of people of color outside of the workplace. So we gathered up our BMSP partners and developed a cultural spotlight. So this is just a glance into some of our region's cultural assets. We sought out to highlight, authentic food spots where you can have that real experience of cuisine and dining. We highlighted spaces that are culturally relevant and inviting that individuals can explore or attend events that are regularly hosted in those spaces. And then 3, provided some digital links where people of color can stay updated on the latest things happening in their community, plug into new events, or get their hands on new resources that come out of some of our partnering organizations' efforts. So before we get to questions, if you guys are interested in getting connected to these resources, everything is available on our website at makeitmsp.org/BMSP. The newsletter is a great way not only to connect with BMSP, but to connect with many of our partners and the organizations that are doing this important work in their communities. Second is to go to our BMSP webpage where you can find things like our Workplace Inclusion Toolkit and the Cultural Amenities Guide, but also where you can view some recent blog posts that we've collected from our partners and provide some feedback on what you think we can improve to really make these assets something that's of use to improving the experiences of our communities of color. So that concludes our presentation, and I already see some questions coming in, so we're really excited to start answering some of those.
There's a ton of questions in the chat and the Q&A box. Some of the questions I see, I can throw one out there. Someone asked, is the report also available on the website? Is that accessible so they can share that with their leaders and their higher ups?
Yes, it is. And we'll be sure to send that out to the full team, or Rebecca, so you can send it to the attendees. And in addition to the BMSP Insights report, which again is focused on the experiences of professionals of color, we also have a report that focuses on tech talent, newcomers in general, as well as one that focuses on Gen Z. Those are all available for free online.
Great. And if there are any questions that stand out to you right now from the list, feel free to address them, or I can throw in another question that I saw earlier on in the list.
Yeah, I have a couple that
Okay.
I can throw out here. So I see one asking, were the same people surveyed in 2016 and 2019? So we did send the survey to the same kind of groups and networks that we're connected within our partnership, but we could not obviously reach the exact same people. We did reach significantly less people in 2019, but again, it was the same groups and networks that we reached out to.
Great.
I also see, will there be access to the full data? A couple questions about seeing the study, and everything is in that insights report that Emily will be sharing later on, or Rebecca. There's a question about where people of color are moving to. Do we know where they're moving to? And this is a really good question. We aren't able to look at migration data by race right now, but we do know some of the top metros where Minneapolis-St. Paul is losing professionals overall. Those are Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Denver, and LA. This is from LinkedIn. So this is looking at professionals who documented job change. But this is definitely an area that we want to continue to look into, and we hope to be able to get some disaggregation by race in the future.
Yeah.
Let's see. This is a good one for Emily, maybe. Are these diverse programs within organizations being led by professionals of color? Having DEI programs led by non-Hispanic white leaders is counterintuitive to those who are people of color.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is really an effort, particularly by our corporate partners, to ensure that that representation for these groups is reflective of the communities that they're intended to serve. I think you'll find that many of our even community and regional leaders that are leading these efforts are also reflective of the communities that they're meant to serve as well. But at the same time, also pushing for more allyship across the board as well. This, it kind of goes back to that idea of the work of ERG shouldn't just be the work of the communities they're meant to serve. Like, these are things that should be adopted across our organization. So creating allies and advocates beyond just the constructs of those organizations has been a key driving force of a lot of our partners too.
Here's another kind of similar one. What suggestions do you have for white colleagues to support colleagues of color in the workplace? What are some proactive steps?
I would definitely push to the workplace inclusion. I think there's some great resources in there to help spark some of these conversations about what your unique organization can do. But, as far as what allyship looks like, I think an important thing that we've definitely heard from both through our surveys and through just conversations of, that this data has raised, is that coming from a place of listening first is really critically important. That's why we've been really intentional about providing this unfiltered perspectives, because that's really where you tie the data to the stories.
Yeah, and I think there was one of the mentions in some of the results in terms of what people were giving back in terms of feedback, and they talk about professionalism and kind of broadening one's understanding of what that looks like and what potential implicit bias lies. I know some have talked about like cultural fit, like oftentimes when we're doing a job search process, we're looking for someone who, feels familiar, something that feels familiar, sounds familiar, maybe has some similar background in terms of experiences. So thinking about that and broadening what that looks like could potentially be an option as well in terms of how we support organizations in making systemic changes.
Yeah, and I would add one more point too that came specifically around the conversation on microaggressions, is that this experiences of professionals of color raising these or bringing it to the attention and having them dismissed is for white allies to step forward and to be the one that's calling them out. So be the person that's stepping forward and kind of taking that risk to call out behavior so that your colleagues that maybe people of color do not have to. We're all empowered to and perfectly positioned to spur change.
How about how are you measuring effectiveness of MSP resources that were noted? So like the cultural spotlights and other events and things like that.
So we've built in feedback channels to get feedback on if those cultural amenities have been helpful or not. And I think that the same approach that we took to the workplace inclusion toolkit, I think is one that we should apply across and will apply across all of these resources, and that is focus groups. So when we launched the first workplace inclusion toolkit, we did so with a coalition of partners. And in seeing who actually completed the toolkit, went back and had focus groups and had surveys to gain feedback. And we had a lot of great feedback, and it will encourage changes, but those changes are inevitably needed, especially as the context that they're being used in is changing too. So a cultural amenities guide that we put out at the end of 2020, post-COVID, can and should look different than one that we would have put out last year, because just what people need right now will be changing too. So creating sustained channels of feedback is a priority throughout all of this work.
Couple of questions about survey respondents again. Would the report include names of companies? No, we did not ask respondents to provide the companies that they work for specifically. We asked about the sector that they worked in. So we know that 50% in 2019 worked in the for-profit sector, 21% in nonprofit, 17% in government, 8% in education, and then 4% who preferred not to.
Oh, I believe you're muted. Are there any other questions that you'd like to pick up at this moment?
Yeah, I'm just looking through a couple of them.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of hard to scroll through the many questions.
I see one that's, that was actually the first question that was asked, and it's interesting, and this is around weather. So you've probably heard Francis kind of laugh a little bit. We get weather all the time in about MSP. I think we've done a perception study, and the #1 word when people could use to describe MSP is cold. So that's not surprising. However, we're being really intentional about not having that be a focus, because that kind of assumes that we don't have a responsibility to change anything. So if weather is what is driving people away, then that's out of our control. But the reality is that doesn't get to the unique experiences of our communities and professionals of color. So that's why we're really trying to focus this work around other things that they have noted that is of importance, like the lack of cultural amenities experiences.
I see another person asking just, can they connect with us? Absolutely. We're going to share Emily's contact information, and we'd love to connect on this further.
And will you be able to share the slide deck with everyone? That's another question I see in the.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah, definitely. And again, kind of going back to what we're hoping as this BMSP team within Make It MSP is to provide this information, and also to connect you to really the people that are leading the way in DEI. So again, we're not the experts, but what we are hoping to do is provide some kind of connection to build a network of networks to connect you to the people that can help you pursue greater DEI and inclusive welcoming within your organizations as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any information on the attrition rate between the different industry sectors, like in terms of the information, this report and its data? Do you have the breakdown by like governments, nonprofit, and so forth?
We didn't ask specifically about industry sector, but again, just sector for for-profit. The for-profit was the largest group represented here at 50%, and then 21% in nonprofit.
Got it.
There's one that says, how do you connect professionals of color, both from Minnesota or transplants, to find opportunities in positions of impact to help change the representation dynamic?
This is a great example of organizations that are actually poised and have identified this. Hack the Gap is a great organization that's actually tech focused, that are working to bring more professionals of color into the tech community here in MSP. Another example is one that was mentioned is actually board repair. So that one's targeted specifically at increasing representation on the mini boards of the land of 10,000 nonprofits that we have in Minnesota as well. And these are, I think that this is really important. Something that we could do better is to provide lists of those organizations, because they do a great job at focusing on specific places of impact. So like increasing professionals of color in tech, increasing professionals of color in board membership. So this is something I think that going to the Center for Economic Inclusion and seeing some of their resources is a great place to start. And then tapping into some of those networks of those individual organizations that are seeking to attack those issues as well.
Yeah, there's another one kind of generally asking what other organizations and career networks would we recommend?
I could give a plug. The University of Minnesota Alumni Association has a number of affinity networks. We have the Multicultural Alumni Network, the Pride Alumni Network, the Muslim Alumni Network, and those are just great communities. We create spaces by having networking events, usually in the spring semester, but it's a great place to kind of network and meet others who have similar backgrounds. And so I really encourage anyone out there to really tap into their alumni networks.
I will say as well, I think I'm going to look and see if we can send this out with a recap to this webinar, because in our workshop where we dove into some of this data, that question came up as well. And we did a live poll, and people submitted all of the organizations that they have worked with or that they know of, and it populated on the screen. And I think we got close to 100 in a matter of a few seconds. So I think that's data that we still have and would be valuable to send out, particularly as you're looking to connect with those communities that are serving, either you or to provide the liaison to the employees that you're hoping to get connected to them. I'll see if I can find that.
How about any tips as a hiring manager on how to craft job descriptions and job posts?
I believe on the University of Minnesota's Career Services webpage, there's actually information on that. So if you go to career.umn.edu, we have a resource on how to craft your job description. And I'll have to find a direct link and send it to all the registrants today so they can have the information. But if there are any others that come to mind, feel free to mention them.
I think I see a really great question here. Could it be that people's expectations of DEI are changing, and that's why we see some lower scores here? And I think that that's an absolute possibility. I'll let Emily talk more about this, but we certainly hope that as we continue to work on this issue as a region, we continue to have higher expectations and develop better solutions. So I think that's absolutely the hope.
Yeah, and to that point of if it's changing, we actually saw some early research that's pointing to it's also becoming not an expectation, but it's a reality as well, just the level of diversity. So with Gen Z in particular, they're fully expecting to have DEI at the forefront of their communities and of their workplaces, because that's the reality for the makeup of that population. So just the sheer type of people that are entering our workforce is going to drive change in this as well. Also, I think that statistic about, the people who believe their workplace is investing in DEI support having decreased from 2016 to 2019 is really telling too, because I think we've reached the point where we're talking about it and we need to see real impact. So change needs to continue to happen on a scale that's beyond the conversation. And I think that this urgency is only continuing to increase, and it should.
Well, I think with that, I can kick it over to Rebecca to help us get wrapped up.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Emily and Francis. It was a pleasure working with you. I thought this was all great content. Definitely lots of great information and gave a lot to think about. I think people can definitely take this information back to their organizations and think about how they can make potentially systemic changes within their organizations, examining their job descriptions, examining their recruiting process, and examining their employee engagement and what they have, what they do in those spaces, and how to make things more inclusive. So definitely thank you so much for all this information. It's definitely very helpful. And I'll be sending out an email with the recording of this webinar, as well as the slides and some of the other resources that we mentioned, to all of the registrants within the next 2 business days. So definitely be on the lookout for that. So thank you so much for participating today. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.